Welcome.
Thank you.
So could we bring up the next, I think, I can do this, right? I have the power. Or one more? Okay. Can you all see that? Right. Welcome to Claremont.
Thank you.
And this is your first time here?
That's my first time.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm here. A guy without a college degree sitting on this campus and Peter Drucker School, I mean, that's beyond belief.
You met Peter Drucker?
I did.
Yeah. What was that like?
It was an incredible experience. It was early on in the Starbucks days, and we were looking for help, and so he was one of the people, along with Warren Bennis and Robert Greenleaf.
Oh, wow.
All three added value to our organization.
In this conversation around purpose, you have a very highly defined way of seeing yourself, And when we were talking about what we'd like to do for today, he said, why don't I send you this thing I carry around in my pocket? And about 10 minutes later, an email shows up, and the subject line is Howard in 50 words or less. And it was this document that you see here. And would you walk us through this?
Sure. This came about when I was in my mid-20s, and I was struggling with who I was because I had been challenged by a CEO of the company that I was working for. And he wanted to give me input one day, and he said, one of the problems with you, Howard, is you always wear your heart on your sleeve. And great executives don't do that. They hold their cards close to their vest. And the second thing he said, you're always willing to express your opinion and always showing your passion and enthusiasm. Great executives kind of hold all that stuff down and want to be seen as a really thoughtful person. So if you really want to be a great executive, you have to change. And so the problem was at that age, and I had a couple years of community college. I was the son of two immigrants. Father had a small mom and pop grocery store. I grew up in that kind of environment. My father had charge accounts for all his customers. They weren't his customers, they were his friends and his neighbors, And so here I was with this CEO telling me I had to be something other than what I was. And I had no way of having a conversation with him because I had never thought about who Howard was. I was just Happy Howard, Happy Howie, they called me, being who I was without any thought about it. And after going through that experience, I got very depressed and thought I had to change, and I decided to quit that company because I couldn't live under that. And anyway, we made peace with the CEO, but I said I was going to figure out who Howard was. And that began a lifelong journey that I thought was going to be 6 months. I'm 72. It's turned out to be 50-some years, almost 50 years of a journey. And so this document has gone through many iterations, but I've had this document since I was 28 years old. And I've carried it with me. Before there were computers and cell phones, I always had it on a piece of paper in my briefcase. And now, of course, I have it on my cell phone, iPad, computer, everywhere I go. And even though I know every word on this page, it's so easy to forget who we are. When things are going great, we forget who we are. When things are going bad, we forget who we are. When you have troubles, we forget who we are. And because human beings are incredibly fragile. So this is my guide. And this keeps me to where I'm at. And I look at this every day. I have it in my desk, and I have it real big on my desk in front of me. And I'm always looking at it. And, my mission to nurture and inspire the human spirit in every day, beginning with myself first and then for others, is my driving force. And it shows itself up in ways like this, but primarily in ways that nobody would think would be anything about nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. I have this game I play with myself. Every day I have to pick up one piece of garbage off the street. I have to bend over and pick up a piece of paper or a can or whatever it is, primarily Star Wars cups if I see them. I hate to tell you, I leave the McDonald's ones. No, I don't. And it's a humbling experience because you bend over and your big butt shows and people are thinking that, what's he getting, $1 or something? But if I go to bed and I haven't done it at night, I put my overcoat on over my pajamas and I go down and get a piece of paper. Fortunately, I live in downtown Seattle and there's a never-ending supply of inventory. So that's what I try to do. That's how I try to live my life. And I get to do it in big ways and small ways. And my core values, probably all of you could go through and maybe put some of these on your core values. But honesty is my first core value. probably if I went around this room and I asked everybody, are you an honest person? Everybody in this room would say they're an honest person. Nobody would say I'm dishonest. But each of us might have a different interpretation of what honesty meant to them, how it informed your actions or the decisions you make in life. I bet you if I asked the CEO of Volkswagen, the CEO or the past CEO of Wells Fargo, were they honest people? They would say they were honest, wouldn't they? They would absolutely say, I'm an honest person. But how did what happened in their organizations happen? It happened in what I like to call 3-second increments. They go from a great idea, right? We're going to make cars that use less fuel and are better supposedly for the environment. And then they find out, it isn't quite the way it is, somebody on their team, and somebody makes a little 3-second decision. Then somebody else makes a 3-second decision. And all of a sudden, all those 3-second decisions have made up into dishonesty. And that's probably what happened at Wells Fargo. How could it be bad to sell your customers things that they might want? Products that you sell, as long as you do it in an honest and open way and a caring way, and understand that you're there to serve them. That is your only role. And all of a sudden, in 3-second increments, it went from doing that to all of a sudden, it was the driving force in an organization. And if you didn't do it, you didn't keep your job. And that was all in 3-second increments. So our values, right, it's how we define them and how we act on them and how we live them. And we always have to be asking ourselves that question. What does honesty mean to me? And we can all fall victim to our, what I like to call our board of directors. Because each of us has a board of directors. They sit on our shoulders and they're talking to us all the time. They're talking to you right now, aren't they? Some are saying, geez, I got a lunch engagement. How long do I have to stay to this, Or whatever it happens to be. And so I have that same board, and that board will try to influence me. I have one that says, hey, it's okay, Howard, to cheat a little bit, sometimes. And then I have another one that says, hey, wait a minute, Howard, honesty is your most important. And the biggest challenge in life is to learn how to manage that board. That's our biggest challenge as human beings, is to manage our own personal board of directors. And then how I do everything, that's just how I try to drive my life. With everything I do has to have a purpose greater than myself. I have to have a connection between myself and serving another human being. And if I'm going to do that, I want to do it with passion. I want to tell the world, because it kind of keeps me honest about that. And it gets me up in the morning. And I attach to it. And then persistence. You all know that word. There's rocks in the river no matter where you go. Most of the rocks in the river are the ones we put there ourselves. But there are rocks in the river that other people put, that society puts, all sorts of things happen. But persistence counts. I've worked for entrepreneurs my whole life. If there's one word I would use to describe entrepreneurs, they're persistent. And that I'm not talking about business entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs as well. People that are running nonprofits, it's the same. Or people that have an idea to serve society. It takes persistence. And then patience. I didn't learn patience until I had grandchildren. Yeah, anybody have grandchildren? You know what I mean. You learn patience with grandchildren. The most important person you have to have patience with is you. And then performance. Performance counts. We don't like it. It's the biggest struggle we're having in this country right now is with that word, performance. If you look at the struggle we're having in education, particularly K through 12, nobody wants to be evaluated. Students don't want to be evaluated because they all want to come here. So they all want straight A's and they want credit for everything they do. Parents don't want their kids to evaluate because they all want them to get a great degree and earn a great living. Teachers don't want to be evaluated because, particularly by their students, because what would students know about teachers' performance, right? And principals don't want to be evaluated. Superintendents don't want to be. Nobody wants to be evaluated. The facts are performance counts in life, no matter where you go. So if you all have married or significant others in your life or living with somebody, you're evaluating that other person's performance every day, whether you say something or you're not, right? Your son at 11 months is evaluating your performance.
Undoubtedly.
Right? Yeah, and I guarantee your wife is certainly evaluating your performance, right? And so that's part of life, and we have to get comfortable with that. We perform for each other. And how we treat each other. Look at what's going on in our political climate today, right? I wouldn't call that performance, right? Because what's happening, we're tearing people down instead of building people up. And performance is about building people up. is making the world a better place and creating each individual to make a better human being. So, and then the final P is there's not one thing any of us will do in our lives that isn't about serving people, period. I don't care what your job title is. I don't care whether you're making widgets, whether you're saving lives, whether you're teaching classes, whether you're building buildings. It doesn't make any difference what you do. Everything all human beings do is serve other people, and that's why we're put on this earth, period. End of story. That's all it'll ever be. So that's my Howard in 50 words or less.
So as a way of it's a way of framing where attention goes.
Yeah. That's what it is. That's what it is for me. Because if I don't have that, just like you were talking before, my mind will wander just like anybody else's. When I left Starbucks, I left, I was angry when I left. I was disappointed about some things that had happened, and I decided to resign from the board over it. And I'd always told people, you're not, the people that worked at Starbucks, you're not Starbucks and Starbucks is not you. You're a whole human being before you came to Starbucks. And what we hire is the whole human being that you are, not what we want to make you into. And yet I fell into the trap. And I went through 2 years of really severe depression after I left Starbucks, because all of a sudden my life was empty. Or I felt that it was empty. And I'd done a lot of personal work before. It wasn't like I was a virgin to all this stuff. I wasn't. But I'd lost track of all of that. And one day I was laying on my sofa, I have a house in Palm Springs, reading a book, and I was really depressed, and I was thinking, my life is just really not worth living. And all of a sudden these words came into my head. Howard, your life's work is still your life's work. And I kind of just, woke up a little bit after laying. So I said, you're right. Talking to myself, to one of my board members. Yeah, my life's work is my life's work. And all of a sudden, it started to grab hold as I started to repeat those words over to me. And it gave me direction again, because my mindfulness was not on what I was, but what I wasn't.
Right. Yeah. So it redirected something to build on. 2 questions. One is, I was approached by a student recently who is really struggling to find purpose. And somebody who, their parents made every decision for them, and now he's struggling to find out who he is. And of course, at this stage in life, you want to have some hint of that. What advice would you give to somebody in that situation?
Well, it takes work and experimentation. Our lives change over time, but we have to allow ourselves to grow. We have to allow ourselves to try things, make mistakes. And look, everybody, I don't care if they're a 5-year-old or they're an 82-year-old, has purpose. What gets to us is when we think it's about something other than serving. Right? We think it's about building a building or making a widget or teaching a class. And a college student has purpose, but they got to dig down. Why are they going to school? And it's a series of questions that you have to ask yourselves until finally it comes out. And it's there. It's there for everybody. And look, what is a cup of coffee? It's just a cup of coffee. You could be a person that just shoves a cup of coffee across the counter to the human beings that you're serving. Or you could think about yourself in the context of being a social worker. And you've got less than 10 seconds to determine, using your human antenna, of where that person is in front of you. Did their kid just get a full ride to Claremont? And they want to tell somebody how about excited they are because they're not going to have to pay a dime in tuition? Or did they just get a traffic ticket for $300 and that's their food allowance for the month? And you have to determine where that person is, and you have to respond appropriately. Some people just want a hot cup of coffee, no conversation. Some people want conversation. And when you're in service to others, then your antennae are up all the time about why you're here. So the questions I would be asking that student, okay, why are you here? What is it you're trying to do? Why are you going to school? Why did you take that class, right? What is it you want to leave behind? What would you like to accomplish? My favorite question is always, if I had a magic wand and tomorrow morning you could wake up doing anything you wanted to do, and money was no object, you would make all the money you need to live on, what is it you would be doing right now? Would you be on the beach surfing? That's good. Or would you be going to school, taking a class in leadership and management? What is it that you would be doing? And those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. And so, with students, it's asking a series of questions until they finally dig down, and they'll find it. And that purpose might change a little bit, but there's always a connection between ourselves and serving another human being, always.
I want to switch gears to organizational life. And Howard wrote, he didn't ask me to do this, I did this.
That's right, go ahead.
Several books on leadership. This one, it's not about the coffee, right? It's about the people. How do you, let's take the conversation from, if somebody was cynical, right? And they could say, oh, okay, those are nice platitudes, Howard, right? Sure. But what does that actually mean in the day-to-day concrete running of what has become a multinational business? Like, what does it actually mean to put people first?
It means that every action you take is thinking about its effect on the people that you're serving, the people that are working in the organization and the people that you're serving. And that has to be the filter. What does it mean to those people? And every time we screwed up at Starbucks is because we lost track of that. We didn't ask ourselves the question. We just made a decision. I'll give you an example of a huge mistake that was made. Seemed like a small deal at the time. We had a regional vice president in Canada that decided, we used to have T-shirt Fridays. You could wear the Starbucks T-shirt of your choice with different kind of coffee on the back. And he decided that it wasn't professional enough and that he wanted to change that. And so he made a unilateral decision to get rid of T-shirt Fridays. Now you'd say to yourself, hey, it's just T-shirts. What's the big deal? Nobody really cares. But within 3 weeks, we had the Canadian Auto Workers at our door organizing our stores in Vancouver. What was the cause? T-shirts. T-shirts, right? Who would ever think, you'd think it'd be pay, benefits, somebody yelling and screaming, it was T-shirts. And it was a valuable lesson that we all learned at Starbucks of how important the littlest things are. And if we're really serving other people, then we should have been asking them, let them figure out. We could have said, hey, we think it's not professional of us anymore. We're growing up. Do we really need T-shirts? And let them make the decision. Or at least let them give the input and know that their input counted. But it's all those little things. So at Starbucks, we always tried to do that. We had a thing we called mission review. And in every paycheck, there was a card. And you could send the card in with a challenge to leadership about, we had our mission statement, right, and our guiding principles. Any decision that we'd made that they felt that was either that they wanted to see us do more of that was in keeping with our mission and our guiding principles, or where we had broken the promise. And we had to get back to them within 72 hours if they gave us their name. And that kept us honest. We read those cards. I read them every day, religiously. Because I was there primarily before the computers really took hold. But now, now it's all on the computer and it's easy to do. But then I used to take 500 cards a night home with me and read every one of them. And I'd get the customer comment cards too. And that kept us focused. But it's the little things that count. I used to send company anniversary and birthday cards to everybody in the company until we hit about 10,000 people. Let me tell you, I'd take boxes of cards on the airplane. And I would sign every one, and the people that I knew, I wrote a note, right? And then I finally handed it off, and I kept doing it for some part of the group, and then the regional people started to do it. But it was the little things that counted. And we gave health care to everybody that worked in the company if they worked 20 hours a week or more. It was unheard of. Investors would tell us, why do you have to spend so much money? Because we wanted to be able to walk down the hallway, look everybody on the face, and say we're in it together. It was also the things that we didn't do. There were no company cars for executives. There was no health club memberships for executives. There was no accounting fees for executives. And my health care policy was exactly the same as the barista. And I got stock options based on my compensation. They got stock options based on their compensation. So it was the things that we didn't do as well as treating people with respect and dignity. And that's what made the difference. That's what made Starbucks grow, period. I will just tell you that. It wasn't anything special that we did. It's just coffee. So a lot of people didn't like it. They used to call us Charbucks, but it was just coffee. There are a lot of people selling coffee, but at the end of the day, I remember Howard Schultz and I were, when we first had our first big managers meeting in Seattle, all managers from around the world, 7,000 managers, store managers. And we were sitting down in the front of this big arena, and we looked up and we say, how the hell did this happen? And that was really the truth. It wasn't us. You know, what we did was set the values, made sure that our people and our leadership lived up to the values of the organization. The easiest way to get fired at Starbucks was not to miss your numbers. You could miss your numbers 2-3 years in a row and not get fired. If you treated people disrespectfully, if you abused people, let me tell you, you got one chance. That was it. And that's what drove it. And that's what made Starbucks. I will never stop believing that that's the difference between Starbucks and pretty much every other company that is in our industry.
One of Peter's great themes was the notion that knowledge worker productivity was one of the great management challenges of the 21st century, and that industrial worker productivity of churning out a part on a factory line was very different than the productivity of knowledge workers. And I'll share a little secret. I teach to learn. I don't teach to teach. I teach to learn things, and my students teach me. And one of the things I think I've learned over the course of 13 years of teaching is that knowledge worker productivity is rooted in two things. One is the quality of your attention and how present are you. And the second is the quality of your relationships. And that if you have those two things in place, then you have nonlinear growth in terms of what it means to be productive. And I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I got invited to speak at Google to the top 200 leaders. You know, when they called me, I said, look, I'm a 72-year-old Jewish guy. I've been in retail my whole life. What the hell do you want from me? I knew nothing about technology. I mean, if the computer doesn't turn on when I press the button, Katie, bar the door. You know, and so they said, well, we're struggling with customer service. And I said, what do you mean? He said, and the person that was talking to me said, well, our founders said we shouldn't have to have customer service because everything we do should be so good that we don't have to have anything. If anybody's tried to get Google on the telephone about your mail, Google Mail, you know it's almost impossible. So I said, okay, I'll come down and speak, but I want to come for 2 days before I speak because I want to talk to your leadership. I want to understand Google because I know nothing about it. And so when I was down there, one of the leaders was telling me a story about how much they just spent, I don't know, $20-30 million on doing a study inside of Google of why some teams performed and why some teams didn't perform. And they came out with one answer. Basically, it was the teams that performed were the ones that cared about each other and trusted each other. I said, you spent $20 million on that? Next time you have a problem, ask me. You know, I mean, look, what makes a family work? What makes a marriage work? What makes things work between parents and their children? What makes things work between teachers and their students? Caring and trust, period. That's it, right? And that's the thing that you got to create. What happens when you don't have trust in a marriage? You don't have a marriage, do you? And what causes lack of trust? Lack of caring and good communication, everyday communication. And I always like to tell a story about performance reviews because I don't believe in performance reviews. They're just a waste of time. Okay, you know, we do them because we have to do them at the end of the year. But performance reviews are every day. Every day. Just like I said, your wife is evaluating every day she's evaluating. So remember that. Okay.
I get a report at the end.
Well, yeah, and in leadership roles, right, what makes it really work is when one of your people does something great, tell them now and tell them why it was great. Or if they screwed something up, pull them aside and say, here's something you might do better. When it happens, it's in the moment. That's what makes great relationships work. I mean, can you imagine? All right, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you a challenge, each of you tonight. Here's what I want you to do. After you leave here, I want you to stop by your favorite wine store. And I want you to I want no expenses spared here. I want you to buy the best bottle of wine you can afford to buy that your significant other or spouse likes. And then while you're in the store, buy a couple of really fine Rydell glasses, about 60 bucks a piece, nice crystal. They go ping when you hit them. You know, and then when you get home, I want you to say, hey, honey, I'm home. Hey, honey, I bought your favorite wine only. I mean, this is really a good one. Let's sit down and have a conversation. We haven't had a conversation in a long time. So as soon as he or she comes in the room, open the bottle of wine, sniff it, and pour a little glass for her, for him or her to sip, and say, what do you think? And then, oh, that's really good. And then pour the rest of it in your glasses. And then look at them with love and caring in your eyes and say, honey, this is your lucky day. Today is going to be your annual performance review. and you know, you have had a pretty good year. There are some things that you've done well, but you know, honey, it hasn't been all good. And as your ass is bouncing out the front door, that's how good performance reviews are.
So, on that note, how about we turn it over to you for some questions? I don't want to go home tonight.
Hello, I'm Carlos Cruzedo. I love your idea about having the caring and trusting team members. What do you recommend to really find those people and interview them? You know, it's limited time. What do you recommend for that?
You mean, how do you find caring and trusting people?
During the interviewing process, how do you properly assess that so you bring in the right team members from the start?
Well, you don't ask them about their skill sets. You know, the first question I ask is, tell me, do you have brothers or sisters? And if they have brothers or sisters, I said, so tell me, what does your brother think of you? What does he like about you? What doesn't he like about you? What does your sister think of you? What do your parents think of you? What do they wish that you would have been other than what you are? Right? What was their input along the way? And how do you feel about that input? And tell me about your best friend. Right? And tell me when you did something to your best friend that you're not proud of, and what happened? So I want to know who the whole person is, not what they've accomplished in their life, not what's on their resume. I want to know what makes them tick. Who are they as a human being? And I would spend hours on that. You know, I'll tell you, when I was interviewing for an executive, I always went to the stores. You always find out what a person is like, in retail particularly, when you go to the stores. I always watch what they do. I just would observe. You know, they'd want to talk, and I'd see, where did they go first? What did they do first? If they walked over a piece of paper, the interview was almost over. If they didn't bend down and pick it up, then I knew that they were never going to make it in the store. If they went to the store manager first to ask questions, or do they go to the barista first? It told me a lot about who they were. So it was trying to discover who people were at their core. Now, having said that, I believe you give trust before you get trust. Right? I assume everybody is trustworthy until they have discerned my trust. And it takes a lot to discern my trust. And I think you got to start with that everybody is worthy. Everybody. And then you take things out of there, right? But that's
yeah. How do you decide when trust is earned if you don't start with trust, right? There's not like a
start
bar.
With trust.
Yeah. Who's next? Please.
So did everybody hear the question? The question was, how did you take Starbucks' mission and values and embed it in the culture across the globe? This is one of my most favorite subjects. Okay, so when I retired from Starbucks, you know, I was at the annual meeting, and I got to give a little speech about my experience as being the president of Starbucks International, the founding president of Starbucks International. And what I said was this: after doing that for, I think it was almost 9 years, I came away with absolute optimism about the world in which we live. Because what I found was this. I mean, I wasn't a guy that had any experience. I begged for that job. I wanted to do it. You would never hire me to do that job today, particularly Yum Brands would never hire me, right, to do that job today. But what I found was this, that no matter where you go in the world, people all want to have hope. They all want to grow as human beings. They all want to be treated with respect and dignity. They all want to love and be loved. They all want more for their families, for their children, for themselves. And that's universal. It didn't make any difference what color their skin, what religion they practiced, what country they live in, what their culture was like. It was the same. And the most interesting thing was the things that we took, which was how we treated each other, they translated in every language. There was no difference. Whether it was China, whether it was Saudi Arabia, whether it was Bahrain, whether it was Kuwait, whether it was the UK, whether it was France, and it was always appreciated. And people grabbed onto that the first thing. They grabbed onto that more than they grabbed onto the coffee. And people didn't think it would work. And I was a believer. I said, human beings are human beings. And my mission for our mission for Starbucks International was to use Starbucks coffee to build bridges among people. And that's what we set out to do. And that's what we called it. We said we're going to use this product that we sell to build bridges around the world, to connect human beings to human beings, no matter where they lived. And I'll never forget when we opened our first store in Kuwait City. And I went there, and of course the logo couldn't have a picture of a human being on it. It just had the waves, and it had Starbucks, the round logo in the black and green and white, and the waves and Starbucks coffee around it. And I walked into that store, and here were 3 women sitting around a table in full burqas. All you could see were the eyes. You could hardly see the eyes. And here they were, 3 Starbucks cups, with a straw going up underneath, talking as fast as they could talk, drinking the Starbucks, whatever they were drinking, latte. I knew we had built that bridge. Because the same actions were going on in Tokyo, were going on in Singapore, were going on in London, were going on in Istanbul, were going on in the United States, and going on in Canada. It didn't make any difference where we were going. So I'm a believer that human values are transferable. We think they're not. They are. That doesn't mean we are trying to change their culture and who they are, because they may interpret things a little differently. But they're valuable. In Kuwait, they said no Kuwaitis will ever work in our stores. All you're going to get, which is traditional in Kuwait, a lot of Filipino citizens, work in the retail establishment. We had Kuwaitis, young Kuwaitis, all wanting to work in our stores because they wanted to work for a company that had values and that cared about its people. And that made a huge difference, and it works. I'm just a believer that it doesn't make any difference. Go with who you are, as long as your values are open and honest and caring, and those things transfer. If you care about people, that transfers, period.
Follow-up question? One more.
I'm going to cheat and actually ask 2 questions. The first one is, you said that there were iterations of Howard and
Right.
what has fallen off recently and what was added, if anything?
My mission statement changed completely. My first iteration of a mission statement was what I wanted, right? I wanted to be recognized as recognized as one of the great leaders in the home furnishings industry. And it changed over time. And I plagiarized this from Starbucks. About 27 years ago it was written. Part of it was written, and I plagiarized part of it. And when I heard the words, Starbucks mission goes like this: to be one of the most well-known and respected organizations in the world, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. Didn't say a thing about how big we wanted to be, how many stores. And when I read those words, and it was done by baristas, district managers, and senior leaders over about a 6-month period of time. When those words came out, I started to cry, honest to God. I said, that's who I want to be. That's me. And I just grabbed it and internalized it. So that was one thing that changed. For the most part, my core values have stayed the same. Trust was one thing that came into it, where I trust in self and others. And I decided, I was raised by a mother who was an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant who came to Seattle in 1909. She was born in Latvia, and she experienced anti-Semitism. Fiddler on the Roof was her story. She lost 3 brothers to Russian Cossacks, and so my mother, anybody that wasn't Jewish, she didn't trust, period. That was just who she was. She was a good person, but it was her set of experiences. And so that kind of got overlaid in my life. And I changed this when I was in my mid-40s. And I said, I can't live my life like that. You know, I have to live my life trusting people first. Because I was always so uncomfortable with it. And so that was one of the big things that changed. And my 6 Ps I've had almost forever. It was how I wanted to live my life. And so, you know, most of it has stayed the same. Now, my interpretation of my values, I've really forced myself to define it, because the words are just the words. Until you define them for yourself, until you say, how do they inform your actions or the decisions you make in your life, then all they are is just words. And so I keep doing that.
Your attention is going today.
Where is what?
The good place your attention is going today.
It has been
It
what
needs
it's
a good
been.
place to go,
Yeah,
right?
It's, you know, my attention now is 100% focused on people, on others. It doesn't make any difference. I get up every day thinking about that. And, you know, it gives me such great energy. It doesn't mean I don't get down, I do. You know, my down days like everybody else. But when I go read my statement, I always come back to that. What really helps me is that darn piece of paper. You cannot believe how invigorating, how motivating it is to bend over. You know, and pick up the paper. It sounds strange, but it is so true. So, you know, and, you know, it is. It sounds strange, but it really is. And so, you know, I feel better about myself when I'm serving other human beings, period. That's the story of my life.
With that, please join me in thanking Jeremy and Howard for a great conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Howard.